All right, can everyone hear? I'd like to welcome you to the Revising Your Application Based on Feedback webinar. I'm Kathy Zalamki, the Program Manager for New School Development at the League, and we have Tiffany May Estes here from Parker Performing Arts School that's going to share her on-the-ground experience about putting her charter application together. Just an overview for the webinar. For asking questions, there's a place to type questions down in the right-hand corner. And we probably won't use raising your hand. I think it works better if we can kind of monitor the questions and answer them either now or I can respond in an email later. Any questions before we begin? All right, we'll continue on to the next slide. So, well, that's interesting. There had been something on this slide and I don't, oh, there it is. The magic slide. So we did introductions already, and thank you for those of you who are joining today. School developers are mostly who's involved with this, but there may be some individuals that can access this to see how to take information that they get and use it for other purposes. We want you to come away understanding the importance of having an application review, which we offer, and there's written feedback that's provided after each of a two-part review that you can use to make revisions. Understand how to make those revisions based on feedback, and I think Tiffany has a lot of tips that she can provide on that. And then understanding how to access and use additional resources. So without further ado, we'll get started. Just some tips on writing your application. Just be sure to use good style as you're putting information together. Be concise but complete in how you're explaining things. So it's important to have enough information that somebody that doesn't know your program can understand it from what you're writing. So it should be professionally put together. Make sure that what you're doing doesn't denigrate what's happening in the district, but rather addresses how you can add to the district's offerings with the quality program. Jargon and acronyms are hard to understand, so make sure that they're either clearly explained or try to use terms that a layperson would understand. And grammar and spelling is one of those things that can really detract from something, and so any reviewer kind of gets sidetracked if something isn't spelled correctly or there's poor grammar usage, or we've even seen groups that have borrowed information from other schools and forgotten to change the school's name. So just be clear with your editing as to what you're trying to say, and then be sure to divide things up with section headings, bullets, things to make it more understandable. Summarize wherever possible and give examples. Other things to consider as you're putting your proposal together: make it easy to read and make sure that you understand what the authorizer is looking for. And our quality standards that have been developed and have been in use for nearly 10 years now really spell out what's required in statute, but they also give detail on what types of things you'll need to have in place in order to take this proposal and hit the ground running once you're approved. So it's really meant to be a good solid blueprint for what you need to do to open a quality school. Use information that you find in research on how effective your program pieces are, and make sure that you start early enough. I think people underestimate how much time this is going to take to put an application together, but after all, you're developing, it's a school, but it's also a small business that you're starting, and so there's a lot of aspects that have to be ironed out and be cohesive and work together. Know what's out there in the community and what a need is, and see if there's an interest in that need, and write to the diverse audience that will be reviewing your application. So there's officials in the district and specialists in the district that will look at your application. Ultimately, it's decided whether or not you'll be approved by a board who may not have an educational background, and so you have a very diverse group of people that you're explaining this to, but you'll also have parents and community members and teachers and board members that you'll need to have all on board with your plan as well. So be sure to keep your audience in mind. Any kind of feedback that we give in our reviews is meant to be critical feedback in a professional manner. Don't take things personally. It's meant to be something where we point out where disconnects or confusion or things that just don't make sense or maybe won't even meet statute. So just take it with that thought in mind. And don't try to solve everything for everyone. You can't be everything to all people. Whatever you choose to do it really well. And for innovative ideas, I think that's one of the game changers of what's going to make education better for kids. But be sure to provide enough research and make a case for why the programs you're looking at using together will work together. And I always like to say the burden of proof is on the group. So if there's a legal aspect to it, you need to research that legal aspect and then explain how it will work so that there aren't questions that come up. For our review, we have 3 reviewers that look at each draft of the application, and we diversify the representation of these reviewers because you have a diverse audience that you're addressing with your application. And so keep that in mind, that different people come from different perspectives and experiences. We do use the quality standards and the standard application rubric in our reviews. Each reviewer scores and reads the application independently, and they use the standards and the quality standards and the standards rubric, to put their score together. And then they're totaled and averaged in this. We have a newer format where we are actually averaging the scores. And then we'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses, areas you can improve or areas that come across really well. And we review based on the merit of the application and kind of from an authorizer's lens as to what makes sense, how it's going to impact the students in the area, whether or not there's a strong academic component, whether or not there's compliance with statute, and whether or not it's financially viable. I love this quote, and it's just to kind of point out that we're not out to get you. Whenever we do reviews and provide feedback, it's not a perfect process, but it's not a conspiracy to design to maintain the status quo. I can't even read, sorry. So we are looking for innovative ideas, but there's certain parameters that as a charter school, you're also a public school, that you have to operate within. And so we keep an eye on that as we're reviewing. And then just some different tips there. Different reviewers may have the same point of view but score differently. Just some different things to think about. Make sure that your enthusiasm for your proposal comes through, because that's really, I think, a lot of times a game changer as to whether or not people take your proposal seriously. But I think it also helps as you're putting things into it from your heart. And again, remember that final product should be a good blueprint for opening your school. The reviewers have limited time, so just keep in mind there's a schedule, and it's important to keep that schedule or touch base early if you can't. Again, grammatical errors and things can really be distractions. A strong proposal is an innovative idea oftentimes that it's shaped into a coherent plan, so make sure you include sufficient data, such as how this program or program components have worked with a like audience or demographic, references to where you find this information, and contingency plans. So if you can think about what kinds of things you might come up against if something would have glitches in it, maybe what you could do to address that if you see something isn't working. And again, don't assume reviewers know what you know or think as you think. And so be sure and explain your thought process and enough detail that they can see how it will actually work and be implemented at this school. And just think it through step by step. And I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany now to share some of her experiences.
Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Maestas, and as Kathy said, I'm with Parker Performing Arts School. Parker Performing Arts School was about a 3-year process from when the idea was first conceptualized to when we got our charter application approved. We learned a lot along the way, so I'm hoping to share some of the lessons that we learned with you today. I actually came into volunteering with Parker Performing Arts School just after the founding team at the time submitted the first application to our authorizer, which was Douglas County School District. I came in right at the time that they submitted that, and then based on feedback that they had received from Douglas County, they heard that that charter application would not get approved. So instead of the founding team taking the application to the Board of Education for a vote, they decided to withdraw their charter application submission and then continue to work on it. And that's where I kind of stepped in. I signed up to be on a volunteer committee. I was just an interested parent, who's just really wanted my children to be able to attend the school. So I was wanting to work towards founding family status. I signed up to be on our grant writing committee. I have a business writing background. And so they decided to utilize me in helping to prepare and revise the charter application. So what we did was we formed a charter application writing team. It consisted of myself along with 5 other individuals who had some writing backgrounds and research backgrounds. And really the 6 of us kind of went from there to revise our charter application. One of the first things that we had to do was determine our needs, and this was so incredibly hard. As I said, I was a parent, I have a business background, but I don't have an educational background, and I've never even thought about, working in or trying to start a school before. So there were a lot of things that I needed to know, and I think the hardest part is trying to determine what you don't know, because you don't know what you don't know. So we really just did a lot of research and then stepped in and contacted the league because we knew that they were probably our biggest source of information on what we needed to do. So with the work of the league, we decided that we needed to take some of the feedback that Douglas County gave us and then just pretty much work through what the league said that we needed to do. One of the first things that we did was we really read through our current charter application as it was submitted on that first round. And at the time, I think that application was like 50 pages. And when we ended up doing our final submission, I think we were closer to 250 pages. So that can show you all of the information that we put in there. But all 6 of us read those 50 pages just to get a really good idea where we were starting from. And then we decided to apply for a planning grant from the league. We talked with a lot of individuals, and we really needed some help, especially in the areas that we did not have expertise in. So we really wanted to hire some consultants to help us. So we applied for one of the league's planning grants, and I think that that was probably the biggest eye-opener and turning point for us. Because we thought we were really far along in the process. So we applied for a stage 4 planning grant. And I think it was through that application process that we discovered that we really needed to step back to stage 1, that we weren't as close to getting a charter application submitted as we thought we were. So we really started at the beginning. We applied for a stage 1 planning grant, and that really allowed us to hire the consultants that we needed to help us in the areas that we did not have expertise in. We got some suggestions on some consultants from the league, so they can provide you a lot of contacts in those areas. And we hired one consultant that helped us with a few of our sections. They helped us with our educational program, evaluating pupil performance, and employees. Those were the three that we were kind of really stuck on, and we didn't know what we needed in that to make it better. And then we also hired a consultant that helped us with our budget narrative and our budget, because we had a lot of lacking information in those areas as well. In addition to that, we just really tapped into our community of volunteers. We formed several committees during the process, and we had a lot of people signing up to volunteer, but I don't think any of them were ever really being utilized. And so we started really looking at the backgrounds of some of our volunteers, and just parents like I was. I mean, we had some volunteers who had extreme just helpful knowledge in like special needs and special needs in education, and we didn't even realize she existed, and she became such an integral part in writing our special needs section. So if you can really just tap into your community volunteers to get their expertise as well, that's always helpful. And then in that process, we did a lot of research to improve our content. All of us felt we had a really good idea for a school, but we didn't have a good plan yet for the school. So where we were starting out is we were trying to take that idea and form a plan, and we were really lacking a lot of the research that it took to do that. So we just spent a lot of time. We looked at a lot of schools around the nation that had similar plans and programs to ours to see what they were offering. We just did a lot of different research. Our school is a performing arts-based school, and performing arts and education we found has a ton of research and a ton of supporting content as far as why that type of program can succeed in schools and what it can do to benefit children. So just in doing that process, we really highlighted the program that we were trying to put forward. And then rewriting and editing the application, that was a process. It wasn't a one edit and we were done. We went through so many revisions through that process. And one of the most important things is just make sure you divide up your work. Don't try to be the martyr who takes it all on, because I sometimes can be guilty of that, but really utilize people and divide up work and have a good plan on how you're going to get those revisions done. And then, just really revise based on those required elements from those quality standards. I know Kathy mentioned that at the beginning of the webinar, and I will admit, when I kind of came on, I didn't even know those quality standards existed. And then when I started reading them, it just really was an eye-opener at what we were truly missing from our charter application. So you just really need to start at the top and read through those quality standards and go through your application draft. And just really expect to have late nights. We pulled several all-nighters during this process, and it was a lot of work, but it's very rewarding work. So just know that there will be times where you stay up all night doing this. And then submitting your draft application to the league for review. I think this was one of the most crucial things that we did in getting our charter application submitted and approved. We utilized the league, I think, in every possible way that we could. We applied for every grant that we could. We went through their application review process. We went through their interview process after we had our application submitted. And we kept to their timelines. I'm a very strict timeline person, so if someone gives me a deadline, I will stay up all night to meet that deadline. And I think that's really critical, because I think from the time we hit our last review with them, we only had about 2 weeks to submit to our authorizer. So if we hadn't kept to their deadlines, I don't think we would have hit our authorizer's deadline. And just when you're working with the league, act like everything that you're submitting to them is a final draft. Don't say, I can work on this section later because I know I'm going to do another revision with them. Act like it's your final one, and really put your best effort forward on every revision that you do. And just use the information they provide to really make an excellent application. I was sharing with Kathy prior to this starting that when our charter application did go in front of the Douglas County Board of Education for a vote, We had a lot of really, really nice comments about our application. It was called exemplary. It was called something that they could use as a model for future applications. So it was just worth all of the effort that we put into it. So moving on, so this is just a sample of some of the feedback we received in our first review. I believe we have shared with you our whole feedback document, so you can look at that. But this is just a snapshot from what we received. So you'll see that there is the performance standards, and there's the score, and then it shows you know, what we were missing and then what we needed. One of the things on this one, the performance standards, include a sample report card. I don't think we had that.
I think this is something you did well.
Oh, we did well. Okay, so we did have that. No, we did do that. Okay, so we had our sample report card in, but it wasn't clear what the grading scale or mastery level would be. And it wasn't clear when conferences would happen or the exit standards for each grade level. That was one of the things that we hadn't considered, you know, what those exit standards would be. So that was very helpful feedback. And when we did our next revision, we had included all of that information. And then just some other feedback is quarterly for some things, per semester for other things. And that's just really important to make sure that you read through your charter application and you're consistent on everything that you're talking about, because you want to make sure you have a good quality, consistent plan in place. And then we were missing our exit requirements for graduating 8th grade. So that was something that we also worked on. So revising based on the feedback. So we use the feedback in those targeted areas by really reviewing all the comments. And we started seeing a pattern because there were things that if you've already started working on your charter application, you'll know that there are information that will be in, you know, 2, 3, 4 different sections. And I think that some of that consistency we were missing, where we might have outlined it really well in one area, but not in other areas. And you really start to see a pattern. So just make sure you read all of that feedback. And then take that feedback to research on how to correct or add in the information that they suggest. So make sure you know, you ask questions when you don't know what maybe a comment meant. I think there were several times that I emailed Kathy and said, can you clarify this? Or I'm not even sure where to go. Can you help? And everyone at the league is here to help you. So make sure you ask them questions and get those clarifications if you need to. You know, on how to research, you know, we really started looking at sample applications. The league has several sample applications on their website. We did a lot of Google, you know, started looking at different programs like ours around the country. But you really need to try to be unique. Don't just copy somebody else's work. Just use it for inspiration or for an idea of the information that you need to provide. Just use that as a starting point. And then make sure you do your due diligence. You know, this is so important, especially when you're trying to make some decisions for your school. You know, make sure you research all of your options. You really want to do what's best for your school and your community. So make sure you have those options available and do the due diligence. Getting legal advice when needed. Make sure you get a relationship early on with legal counsel because they will be very critical to you after your charter application's approved. When negotiating your charter contract, starting to negotiate a building or land. So make sure you get that relationship early on and ask for advice on different sections if needed. And then make sure you have your legal counsel review any relationships that you may highlight in your charter application. If you've already started working with maybe a school developer and you have that in your contract, or if you're working with maybe a charter management organization, Make sure you have your legal counsel review all of that and make sure everything is good to go in that area. And then develop an editing process. I think this was really crucial because, like I said earlier, you're going to have different information that's in several different sections. So if you edit it in one place, you need to make sure you edit it in all the places. So just really be concise in your plan, be consistent, make sure that repeating information is changed throughout the sections, and edit your application so it sounds like one voice. We had 6 different people working on the application. We assigned different sections. Everyone had a different writing style. Everyone had a different way of wording things. So when it came together at the end, we really needed to make sure it sounded like it was written by the same person. And just don't slack on making those revised drafts. Act like you're submitting that it's the final draft. Don't wait to do any of the work later. Address all of those concerns that came back in those review comments, and submit a completed application based on those quality standards. And then even when you do your second revision and second draft, be prepared for more work because you aren't done yet. That was something that, we kind of felt like, oh, we'll be done with our second revision and we'll have an application ready to submit to our authorizer. And that was far from the case. We had a lot of work in those 2 weeks that it took to get it before we hit our authorizer's deadline. So here's some of the feedback from our second review. You'll see that we had a lot more positives on this one. So this was our performance standards again. So we had that sample report card, but we also had this time the details on the exit standards and the promotion. And then we had a lot of appendices to support that as well. So I think that that's something to really make sure you utilize is appendices and supporting information. Then we also had, our performance management plan. We were aligned with our authorizer in our district. We had those grade level promotions. We were aligned with CDE guidelines, and we had a plan that was outlined, that was quite thorough in our application. One of the negative comments they felt then that, we might have been a little too thorough and it might be hard to operationalize. So that was some comments that we really had to take to heart and really circle back around because we wanted to make sure we had a plan that we could implement and sustain. We didn't want to make it so involved that it couldn't be implemented. So we did go through, I think, and then kind of edit some of that down to make it a little easier to operationalize. So those final revisions, this is going to be a lot of work. Those 2 weeks, like I think we had about 2 weeks when we made our final revision to submit to our authorizer. The time-wise, you really develop a plan. What we did was we knew the date we had to submit to our authorizer, and we worked backwards with deadlines for our internal team. That way we were all making sure that we were working towards the same goal and the same timeline. Decide what you are going to address from those suggestions. Like I said, some of our suggestions were that we had too much information on that final revision. I think one of them was our executive summary. I think our executive summary ended up being like, I can't even remember how many pages, but it was super lengthy and it was no longer a summary. So we had to really edit that. But what we did is we had a lot of really good research in our executive summary and we wanted to make sure that that was shown somewhere. So what we did is we took a lot of that research, made it an appendix that we referenced to in our executive summary. So there are things that you're going to have to pare down. There might still be things you need to add. So just really consider, those final research considerations and what you need to work towards. Getting additional help in critical areas. I've mentioned it before, but if there is an area that you're not sure where to go to, ask the league and they can give you recommendations. I know one of the areas that we had, a lot of questions about just because it wasn't our area of expertise were some of the goals that we needed to have. So we worked with the league and they helped us, formulate goals, specifically academic goals that made sense for our school. And that made sense, as far as being in line with our authorizer. And I think I've said it before, make sure you divide up the work. When you come to that final revision, make sure that you edit for that one voice, that it sounds like a cohesive application, that it wasn't written by several different people. Recheck those requirements. We use the quality standards, but we also used our authorizer's rubric as well. We made sure that our final application had all of the quality standards, but was written to our authorizer's rubric. Our authorizer's rubric was written from the quality standards, so it made it really simple to us, but that is something that you'll definitely want to double check, and making sure you're meeting all the requirements of your authorizer. And doing those final edits and formatting, that was one of the, we really had to figure out what we wanted our charter application to look like. We're a performing arts school, so we decided to make our application a little more artsy. So we decided to do more of a magazine style. We included pictures that supported our plan. We had kind of shout outs to highlight different parts of our program. All of that was extra, and it was just something that we thought put a personal touch on our charter application. You want to make sure you adhere to the formatting of your authorizer, because they'll probably want your sections in a specific order. So make sure you do that, but you can also make the application your own, and I think ours was a little more fun to read because of some of the things that we did. So making those final revisions, like I said, you'll just really want to follow everything that your authorizer has in place. So make sure you know your authorizer's submission deadline, and decide what suggestions you are going to address, and then make that timeline for the revisions. Those final research considerations, like I mentioned earlier, just those outstanding items, and just don't take any shortcuts. One of the things that I learned, and this was after our charter application was submitted and approved, was a lot of those items that you see in the quality standards, for example, policies they may want you to include, job descriptions for your staff that you're going to hire. At the time, I was like, really? I have to write all of these job descriptions? Now I am so thankful I wrote those job descriptions, because we're in the process of hiring our staff, and I just couldn't even imagine having to write all those job descriptions right now. So even if it looks like extras as you're doing it, and maybe it's something that you could skip and it might not affect your overall application, it will benefit you in the long run after your charter application is approved. So just take the time while you're preparing your plan to account for all of those items as well. And then just really, divide up your work with what makes sense for your founding team. It's a team effort. Utilize your committees. That was one of the things that I think we did really well, was we had a lot of different committees formed. We even had a committee that managed all of our committees, and they were truly effective. And like I said earlier, we found that we had a lot of really great backgrounds that we could utilize in our charter application writing. So just really make sure that it's a team effort, and that you divide up the work. I'm really big on project management, so I utilized a tool. It's called Trello. It's a free project management software. If you Google it, you'll find it. It doesn't cost anything to use it, but I would assign tasks through Trello, and then you can comment on those tasks, and I would divide it out to our team. So I would say use whatever makes sense for you, but make sure you do assign tasks and deadlines. Everyone knows the deadline that they're working towards and their individual task that they need to do. And then we've talked about it several times, that editing for one voice. After you think that you have your final revision done, read your entire charter application. Have several people read your entire charter application, because we found, like, we were actually printing it to submit to our author some typos, and we found some places where we weren't consistent, and we'd have to go and reprint because we would just happen to glance and see it. So make sure you read that entire application. That's your final revision. And then get a fresh viewpoint. If you have a volunteer who hasn't been working with you on the charter application, send it to them and have them read it. You know, as Kathy was mentioning earlier, you want to make sure that the layperson can understand your program. And sometimes when you're working on it, you're so close to it that you don't see that everyone doesn't understand what you're talking about. So just get those fresh viewpoints. I think I even had my husband read ours, who had no clue what was going on, but he understood, and he got really excited about our school afterwards. So, you know, just get those fresh viewpoints if you can, and try not to take it personally. It's really hard. There were some comments that, you know, we got back in some of our reviews that it truly felt like someone was calling my child ugly, because I was considering our charter application my child at that point. You know, so try not to take it personally. It is constructive criticism that they're providing, even though, you know, after you do several all-nighters, you know, you become emotionally invested in that application. But don't take it personally. They truly are helping you with all of their comments and suggestions. And then again, rechecking those requirements. You cannot do this enough, because you just want to make sure that you have everything that your authorizer requires. You know, and some of those requirements may be printing requirements, or, you know, if they need a Word version of the document in the Excel of your budget spreadsheet, just make sure you have all of those requirements in place prior to making your final submission to your authorizer. Check for spelling and grammar. Like Kathy said, those can be, you know, easy things to fix that can make a big impact if they're left in there. Don't rely on spell check, because you may have a word that is spelled different ways, or you may have a word in there that doesn't make sense in your sentence, but spell check did not catch it. So really just read it over and ask for volunteers. Ask if anyone is good at proofreading. We had one of our volunteers, and she used to work in the political sector, and she would proofread speeches. So I was like, you're proofreading our charter application. So she did that, and just, you know, really check on your consistency, and you know, decide on that application format and make sure all of your pages are formatted appropriately. So I think Kathy's going to go and talk about some tips now.
Great, thank you so much, Tiffany. And I especially want to say thank you to her for sharing all of their documents with you, for us to share with you. The items that were shared were what we consider draft and non-public documents, except for their final application. And so those aren't something that we typically send out to anybody unless there's permission given. And she's allowed us to use all of the drafts and all of the comments and even the feedback for the goals section and things where we pulled in expertise from my colleagues. And I just truly appreciate her willingness to do that, because I think you can now go back and look at sections, and some of them, the executive summary, goals and curriculum, special needs sections would be ones that are particularly good examples of how they took their initial idea, how they took the feedback and made revisions, and then additional revisions, and then final revisions to those sections. And just, you know, a thought on this, the special needs section was one of the most complete I have ever seen. And I actually had a specialist in special needs that reviewed that section and kept having issues with something. I couldn't figure out what it was. And finally what came about was it wasn't clear how adaptations would be made for special needs children to be able to access the entire performing arts program. And so I think that helped them solidify that last piece of how is this going to be a school for all. And you know, I even sometimes have trouble understanding all of the feedback, and yet when it finally came down to that, I think it helped them pull the loose ends together as to how this program could truly be a school for all. So just feel free to take that information. There, you can access this webinar on our website after it's finished. We are recording it, and you can either download or upload the documents that are part of the webinar. You can do that now. You can do it later as part of the webinar, or we have posted those documents on our website as well. So I really encourage you to look at how they took information and made their product better. Next steps and things to think about, and maybe, I don't know if Tiffany wants to go through this.
Sure. You know, your final submission to your authorizer, make sure you check your authorizer's deadline. I know our authorizer, Douglas County, we had to do an intent to submit prior to submitting, so there were 2 deadlines that we had to hit with our intent to submit and then our final submission. So make sure you know those deadlines and make sure you have it in their requested format. We had to do one paper printed copy along with a Word version, electronic copy, and an Excel copy of our budget. So just make sure you're prepared for those. And just a tip, don't underestimate that printing. It's kind of pricey to print all those pages and all of your appendices. I think we ended up using like a 6-inch binder and we barely got it all in. So just don't underestimate that when you're planning all of your costs for submitting your charter application. And then find out the dates for any of your upcoming district meetings. I think those are really helpful for you to prepare for going in front of the board and for knowing the people on your board of education. And then I'm not sure if Kathy maybe wants to talk about the mock interview a little more, and I can tell you some of my experience from it.
Sure. You'll also have possibly a meeting with a DAC committee at the district. They have to review, it's a district accountability committee, so they have to review the charter application and give feedback on it. And sometimes they want to interview the schools and sometimes they don't. But in any instance, you typically get questions from them that need to be answered, and typically that's in writing. So just be prepared for that information. Presentations are sometimes allowed at district and community meetings when they get input from the community to see whether or not this school is wanted. There's a requirement that the district do that, and so it will be important to be able to tell in a short bit of time or a longer amount of time, depending on how much time they give you, what your school is about. So have key talking points, maybe a PowerPoint or a handout, something that you can give that's really informative, that explains your school in a nutshell. Follow up on all unanswered or additional questions. This could be the questions from the DAC committee. It could be questions from a district meeting where somebody from the audience brings something up. It could be questions from the official review from the district. So just be prepared to follow up with written responses because anything that's in writing becomes part of the record. And so if it's done before a vote, then it can be part of what's used as part of the decisions for whether the school is approved or not. And make sure to keep your community involved. We do have a mock interview process that I'll explain in more detail, maybe after Tiffany talks about community support. Excuse me.
Yeah, it is so important to make sure you keep your community involved. As I mentioned at the beginning, from the time our school was conceptualized, it was about a 3-year process. And it's easy to lose people over 3 years. And I think that we were a really good example of how we kept our community involved and interested in our school. And I don't even think Kathy knows this fact, but we just started our enrollment lottery on December 1st. And when we went into the lottery, we had almost 2,500 intent to enrolls. So that is a really good example of how we kept our community involved. Our intent to enrolls just went through the roof. One of the things that we didn't hide anything from our community. When we withdrew our charter application in 2014, we let our community know. We posted it on our website. We did a Facebook post. We held a community meeting specifically for that, so they could ask questions why we were pushing off starting the school for a year. At the time, we had some parents who weren't happy about that. Their children really wanted to go to the school in 2015, but I think now that we're opening in 2016, those parents may not know, but hopefully they know that we're opening a school with a much better plan and program. So just really make sure you keep your community involved and interested and informed of all of your steps and progress for opening your school.
Whoops, we went too far here. So we do have a mock interview process that we offer, and I think there's other organizations that have something similar, where we schedule a time with the league for groups to come in and meet with us and practice answering questions on the spot. And it's interesting, no matter how well you know your school, how difficult this can be. And so I think it's just a good practice for your whole team to really realize what it is you don't know, what it is you believe, and how to explain that to someone else. So I'd recommend that you prepare members of your team to be ready to answer areas where they have expertise, and that those members practice in a mock setting, whether it's with us or with your board by yourselves or with someone else. I think it's really critical to practice answering some questions, just as what do you want to tell us about your school? This is what I want to know. Shoot. So it'll be important to designate a spokesperson when you think about going to these district meetings or interview times. And this person can direct questions. If somebody doesn't start answering something and there's kind of a lull, they can direct a question to their expert. Sometimes people that ask questions are trying to trip up a school, and sometimes they just truly are interested. And so I think it's helpful to also know where the role of the board starts and stops, and where your school leader's role starts and stops, because it's important for the board to have this critical oversight piece for the school, but it's also important for them not to micromanage the school leader. So if you happen to have a school leader that's part of your interview, which some groups have, most groups do not, a question that would be something where a school leader would decide something could be directed to them, or you could say, this is the board's role in this, and we will refer this to our school leader to make procedural decisions on that level. So it's kind of important to kind of know those parameters as well, and know your charter application frontwards and back, and be able to refer them to where something can be found in it. Because I think sometimes you'll have board members or district people that will have read every single word of that application. You'll also have others who will have skimmed through the executive summary and they've got it and they know what they want to do. And so I think it'll be important as you get questions to refer them back into the application, because chances are it's already been explained and you have the research and the references and everything in your application. So it's perfectly okay to refer them back in there. Again, let your passion show for what this school means to you and your community through your responses. I can't stress this enough. You're starting this school for a reason. You know what that reason is. Don't be afraid to share it, again, in a professional manner. And then if you go through us, we do provide follow-up tips and suggestions, things to work on, things to think about, for you to continue to discuss in your responses and practice. typically we'll ask some questions like, what are your top 3 criteria for hiring a school leader or for evaluating a school leader? And quite often we'll get a deer in the headlights look. And it's some of those things you maybe haven't thought about it, but you're going to have to think about it pretty quickly. And it's one of those things that an authorizer wants to know, that a group that's overseeing the school is a board that oversees these public funds that they're giving you permission to use for your school, has the capacity to oversee a school well. And so some of the questions, though they're not meant to trip you up, they might. So just have a chance to discuss, what do we really think? You know, have we talked through some of these in a little bit more detail? And then I'm going to just bring up a couple things and see if anyone has any questions while I'm sharing a few things. Be sure to go ahead and type in that box down to the right if you have questions. One of the things to consider, innovative or out-of-the-box type of ideas sometimes take more description. And some authorizers have page limits to what they want in their applications. Understandably, it's difficult to read a lot of applications if they're 200 pages long. However, sometimes in order to explain your program well and how all the parts will work together in an innovative way, sometimes you need more chance to provide more detail. So if some groups have page limits, one of the recommendations that we have made that has been helpful is sometimes they set up a website that they can link to in their application where they can have additional research, additional white papers, additional whatever explains their program in more detail that readers can go to, but they still get the gist of the program within the body of the application. But don't be afraid to explain that program well, whether you have a page limit or not, because I think it's critical for an authorizer to understand how something's going to be implemented in actual practice at your school with these kids, because that's really what helps them determine whether or not it's a program that they can support and feel good about as well. I thanked Tiffany already. I can't remember what that note's about. The quality standards, I just suggest that you really look at those. There's all sorts of links within those standards. I think we have over 50 links that take you to areas that explain the different content areas. So it'll take you to research or references of what something, a good document is, that something's been written on based on that topic. So just really refer to those quality standards because they're meant to be a handbook to guide you through the process, not just this is what you need to consider, but this is what this means so that you can see how it fits with your program. And I don't see if there's any questions here. We also have some contact information here for Lori, the director of our new school development program here at the League, or myself. Feel free to reach out to us with questions. We're here to answer questions. That's what our job is, to support you through this process, provide technical assistance, referrals, recommendations of folks to talk to or things to read. So we're really here to provide that support for you, and we want you to reach out to us. If you have additional questions that you haven't been able to find answers to, there's also Charter 411 that you can connect with here at the League, and then there's some other website links there of places to find information concerning this process of starting a charter school. So I don't know if Tiffany has anything to add.
I just want to thank Kathy for doing this. I think this webinar would have been extremely helpful to me and the team that I worked with as we were going through this process. So like Kathy mentioned, if you have any questions, please make sure you reach out to the League and ask. If you have any specific questions for me, you can also contact Kathy at the League, and she can get in touch with me, and I can try to help answer any questions that you have. If you have any specific questions for me. So, and I also just want to wish you luck in your charter application writing, and hope it all goes well for you.
Yes, and thank you for joining us. Again, I'll wait just a couple minutes to make sure we don't miss any questions, and it's been great to be able to share with you. Thanks again, Tiffany.